In just over a week's time, I'm going to be boarding a plane for Brussels, Belgium. Cannot wait. I know you guys know that by now because you've heard me talk about it a whole lot. But I thought it would be interesting if we took a little bit of a dive into the history of this country, Belgium. It's a fairly new country. It's newer than the United States. It obviously has history that goes back much further. But as an entity, as a nation, Belgium's pretty new. It's this kind of weird thing, right? It's made up of a area that speaks French and an area that speaks Dutch, and there's kind of this divide there, and it's right in between France and the Netherlands and Germany, and all of this stuff kind of going on. And how did Belgium become a country in the first place? Well, that's what we're going to take a look at today. So we're going to be taking a look at Knowledgia. It's a channel I've watched here and there a little bit, but not very often. But this is their video, History of Belgium in 11 Minutes. And it starts with the question, why is Belgium a country? As always, the link's in the description to the original content, and I'm going to be going live here very shortly with my son Eli over on his channel, Vlogs and Fun with Eli, and we're going to be ranking some of our favorite Sabaton songs, so I'd invite you to check that out. I'll put the link in the description to that. Even if you don't catch the live stream, you can always go back and watch the video later on. Let's dive into why is Belgium a country.
A country that claims 3 official languages and is tightly packed between Germany, France, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. Belgium stands as its own independent kingdom and has since 1830. But with such a mixture of culture, language, and ethnicity within its borders, how did Belgium become a separate nation? First, it is worthwhile to consider the name Belgium. Back in the times of Julius Caesar, the Romans were able to capture Gaul, which was split into 3 regions: Gallia Celtica, Gallia Belgica, and Gallia Aquitania. When the Romans took Gallia Belgica in 57 BC, the people inhabiting the region were known as the Belgae. Whether these Belgae people were of Germanic or even Celtic origin is actually still up for
Yeah, and that's a question with a lot of these Celtic peoples that is still very much a mystery. We don't have great written records of them. We don't have a ton of information that really provides any concrete facts for us. We're still learning about those things, and a lot of what we do know about these peoples comes from people like Julius Caesar, who had a very particular viewpoint that they were writing from. So how much can we really trust it, that kind of thing. But it is really cool when you start looking at Roman history to see so many of the modern names that get used throughout Europe are showing up 2,000 plus years ago in the form of some of these ancient tribes. So it's pretty cool to see Belgium exist with a name that harkens back to the pre-Roman Empire days.
Debate. There are even some scholars who believe that the Belgae themselves were not quite sure of their own origins, and they drew the particular attention of Julius Caesar due to their noticeably different traditions and language as compared to the surrounding Celtic and Germanic tribes.
So it's kind of interesting, a preview there, right? Caught in between 2 very strong cultures with specific languages and specific customs, and maybe kind of a blend of the 2 a little bit, kind of what Belgium is.
The Belgae people are also known to have attempted multiple uprisings while under the hand of the Roman Empire, though none were successful, and eventually the Romans did lose control of the region, but only to the Germanic Franks in 486 CE. From there, Gaul was dominated by a rotation of conquerors, including the Holy Roman Empire, which had a gradual rise and fall in what is now Belgium. Through this time, Gaul as a whole was split into a handful of small feudal states, such as Flanders and the Duchy of Limburg. The borders of today's...
Did he say Duchy? I guess you can say it that way, but Duchy is typically how it's pronounced.
Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands were created after what was known as the Dutch Revolt.
And to this day, that region is sometimes called Benelux, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Benelux. Yeah.
1566. After King Philip II of Spain, a Habsburg monarch, gains dominion over the region, he began what the Dutch people considered to be a tyrannical rule. One pillar of King Philip's rule was his determination to strengthen the Catholic Church throughout his kingdom.
And this area here is often called the Low Countries because it's a very low, flat, right at sea level, sometimes even a little bit below sea level. That's why you have all the dikes in the Netherlands that are being used. Belgium has the same thing. Flanders, which is kind of the western part, and that's where I'm going to be here in a couple of weeks, is very low to sea level, and why you end up with nasty battles like Passchendaele, where it's all mud and flooded, is because artillery and explosions destroy a lot of the drainage systems that are keeping the water from flooding those areas. And then when you get a lot of rain, the water table is very high, so you don't have to dig down very far to hit groundwater. So it's a very unique challenge living in a place like that.
Response to growing Protestantism across the continent. After Luxembourg and Belgium became known as the Spanish Netherlands, with the capital at Brussels, Protestants were subsequently expelled from the territory in 1585. The Spanish Netherlands remained a part of Habsburg Spain until the start of the 1700s.
So there's a lot of history here during this time, and a lot of wealth happening. So, for example, in Ypres, which is where I'm going to be here in a couple of weeks, there's this incredible building called the Cloth Hall that goes back to the 13th century, and it was kind of the center of the linen trade. And there were a lot of sheep in the UK, well, in Britain at the time, and that wool would get turned into very fine cloth. And so there's a lot of wealth there. Some of the largest cities in Western Europe at the time are in Belgium, places like Ypres, for example. They're mentioned, Ypres and some of the other cities in that area, towns, they're not really cities, are mentioned in the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. So even though it's not its own independent country, it is a very influential area.
At which point the area was passed between the French, the British, the Dutch, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Austrian Habsburgs. After the fall from grace of the powerful Napoleon Bonaparte, Europe came together for the Congress of Vienna.
Which we've talked about, and I'll put a link down in the description if you want to watch my whole series on the Congress of Vienna. Quite a few parts to that one, really detailed, but great stuff, and it's so important to understand the Congress of Vienna and the aftermath, to understand how we end up with nations like Belgium, and to understand the Europe that gives birth to the 20th century.
Chaired by Austrian statesman Clemens von Metternich, lasting from November 1814 to June of 1815. With the Napoleonic and French Revolutionary Wars stirring up some unignorable issues within the continent, it was necessary for the neighboring nations to all come together to create what they hoped would be a long-term peace plan. One result of the Congress of Vienna was the uniting of the Netherlands, creating the new Kingdom of the Netherlands, which included modern-day Belgium. Belgium remained a part of the Kingdom of Netherlands until it eventually seceded in 1830. The move toward independence within Belgium really began after the unification of southern and northern Netherlands. The coalition under King William I was beneficial for only some members of the Belgian state, as well as growing disapproval from the Catholics of the new Protestant king, which led to the start of protests.
So it's interesting to see that, because we see some of this happening in modern times with some of the more modern nations that have been formed. Look at the Middle East, for example, where a lot of that gets partitioned after the First World War. And you have countries basically being formed by people outside of the country, places like Europe. And so they're deciding what the borders are, and they're putting these groups of people together that maybe have religious differences or have cultural differences and different backgrounds. And so you have some people who might be okay with the direction that they're going with that, and other people are saying, well, listen, we want to have our own voice too.
Many considered King William to be despotic, and the working class was vastly unhappy with the increasing levels of unemployment. As unrest mounted, the Catholics and liberals of the state joined forces to create a series of demands and an alliance known as Unionism. Finally, on August 25, 1830, tensions boiled over. The capital of the nation became the center point of rebellion. In a fittingly theatrical way, protests and riots broke out around the premiere of the La Muette de Portici opera, which had previously been banned after inciting other nationalist movements across the border in France only a month prior. The protests at the opera began first in the form of patriotic posters placed inside that demanded a rebellion, but quickly escalated into looting and rioting throughout Brussels. As word spread, so did the nationalist and revolutionary spirit. More riots and protests broke out in the surrounding cities, causing King William to send troops into the southern provinces in an attempt to subdue the uprising. Dissatisfied with anything other than independence and freedom from the Dutch, the Belgians refused to back down. By September 27th, only a month and 2 days following the start of the revolt, King William's troops were forced to withdraw. It finally came time for Belgium to officially declare their independence and separation from the Northern Netherlands, which put immediate pressure on the European powers that had previously gathered for the Congress of Vienna to take action.
Because you've made decisions, right, in 1815 about what these borders are going to look like and what these things are going to, how these things are going to break down. And now you've got people saying, no, we are not okay with this. And this is kind of a precursor to a decade or more later when you're going to start to see more uprisings. 1848 is a big year for revolutions and things like that. But there's also going to be one not long after this, the very famous one, if you've ever seen the musical or the movie version of the musical, Les Miserables, or if you've read the book. A lot of the end of that story takes place during an 1832 revolution in France, when France has restored the monarchy. So interesting to see that this is happening around that same time.
King William chose to refrain from any further military endeavors to retake the nation, and the Conference of London was held starting December 20th, 1830. Austria, Britain, France, Prussia, and Russia all participated in the conference and resolved to multilaterally recognize the independence of the Kingdom of Belgium, which was now formally seceded from the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
So if you're the Netherlands, what are you going to do, right? All of these world power, like these major powers, the same powers who decided things at the Congress of Vienna, have all recognized Belgium. I mean, there's pretty much nothing you can do at that point if you're the Netherlands.
One of the rejected suggestions before the conclusion of the conference was proposed by the French, who recommended that Belgium be split based upon the language and ethnic lines within the nation. Labeled as the Talleyrand Partition Plan, it was obviously...
How did I know Talleyrand would be involved in that?
Never pushed forward, but it did demonstrate from the start of the country just how diverse the nation was in terms of culture and ethnicity. While the French peacefully gave up their suggestion, the Dutch were not so willing to compromise for some time. In 1831, they launched an invasion into Belgium, triggered by their strong opposition to the concept of an independent Belgian state. This last-ditch attempt to reassert dominance became known as the 10 Days Campaign.
It's kind of interesting because it must be then that despite powerful nations like the British recognizing Belgium, they must not have backed that up with threats of force or with a defensive alliance or compact of some kind, or a recognition of the independence of Belgium, if the Netherlands felt strong enough to be able to make another attempt to unify the country.
Lasting from August 2nd through the 12th, and incited French support for the Belgians. Luckily for the new nation, the Dutch proved unsuccessful in their military strike, and finally, 8 years later, recognized the Kingdom of Belgium as an independent country in 1839. At the start of Belgium's freedom from the north, a national congress was created in order to establish a constitution for the country. Chosen by an electorate of 30,000 men qualified for such a job, the National Congress of Belgium instituted the Belgian Constitution on February 7th of 1831. This new constitution declared Belgium to be a popular constitutional monarchy, yet no king had yet been chosen. Determined not to crown a monarch from the Dutch House of Orange-Nassau, the National Congress first considered a lineup of 3 French prospects, and Leopold I of the Saxe-Coburg House. Leopold was dropped from consideration for some time.
The Saxe-Coburg House, this is the same royal house that the descendants of Queen Victoria would be a part of. It would actually be the same royal house that the recently passed Queen Elizabeth II was a part of. She would be the last of that house in Britain. It's also the house that rules Portugal for a while, and I think there were others as well. Bulgaria, I think, was part of that house.
Due to influence from the French, but was eventually reconsidered. On April 22, 1831, Leopold I was officially offered the throne. He was initially unsure of the proposal, but ultimately changed his tune and was joyously welcomed by the people of Belgium. Taking his oath on July 22, 1813, Leopold was formally inaugurated.
He say 1813? I'm guessing he probably meant 1833.
As the King of Belgium, and the revolution came to an end in full. This date is now celebrated annually as a Belgian national holiday. King Leopold, as well as his son King Leopold II after him, were focused on solidifying the nation's economic independence and engaging in colonial voyages. The latter of the two found significant triumph in these endeavors, even possessing a strong position in the 1884 Conference of Berlin, and becoming...
It's really interesting that a brand new nation like that would immediately start engaging in colonialism, but that shows kind of... And listen, I'm not praising colonialism, but it was the mindset of the time, especially of the European powers, in particular the Central and Western European powers, the British, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French, the Germans. This is something they were doing. The Dutch got in on this as well, and so Belgium, of course, is joining in the party.
The head of state of the Congo in 1885. Congo later came under the dominion of the Belgian state in 1908, and the nation was fairly smooth sailing until World War I broke out. Germany, who had previously signed the Treaty of London back in April of 1839, breached the agreement, which established a permanent neutrality for Belgium by invading the country in 1914.
And we've talked a lot about this before. This is going to become one of the key reasons why Germany doesn't win the war. Belgium being invaded, number one, they could have stayed out of it and they could have just allowed Germany to pass through. Had that happened, I think Germany wins the war. They fight, and if they could have fought and lost quickly, and had that happened, good chance Germany wins the war. But they fight, and they fight well enough that, number one, them fighting and Germany violating their sovereignty brings the British immediately into the war, whereas that might not have happened until it was too late otherwise. But they also fight well enough that they slow the Germans down and buy time for the Allies to get their act together.
After the German Chancellor referred to the prior deal as just a scrap of paper.
Yep.
Though Belgium, under the command of King Albert I by this point, was sorely unequipped to truly match the Germans' army, they did manage to hold off the invasion to a certain extent. The Germans caused massive destruction to the Yser region, but were unsuccessful in pushing past the river. Still, the damage done during the war was not non-existent. Additionally, Germany ignored Belgium's neutrality once again as World War II rolled around, and the reigning monarch, King Leopold III, chose to capitulate after 18 days of German assaults. This decision sparked controversy within the Belgian borders, and Leopold eventually abdicated to his son, Baudouin I, in 1951. After the wars, Belgium was eventually transformed into a more secure state as political and governmental stances shifted. While movements pushing for a reunification between Belgium and the Netherlands did exist,
and Luxembourg, Benelux, there you have it.
Even beginning back in 1830 at the birth of the nation, disapproval of independence never reached a high enough level for action to be taken.
You can understand why some people might push for that because, you're obviously stronger. I mean, look at it. You're small countries surrounded by very big, very powerful, very high population countries. So you can see why there would be some benefit to those countries uniting together. And they've united in some ways to help strengthen one another, but they're obviously not one government.
Aside from a ban of any Orangism or reunification expressions in the public sphere, which could incite hefty penalties dished out in 1834. Today, the Kingdom of Belgium remains its own country, despite hosting a mixture of cultural, ethnic, and linguistic influences from its neighbors. Still, as of 2018 and determined by birthplace, a whopping 88.1% of Belgium's population are actually Belgian, and the country is an important member of the European Union.
All right, that was pretty cool. I got to learn some things there. The history of Belgium's not one I know about other than the parts of history that I've been studying, which is in particular, World War I. So I'm glad to know a little bit more as I make my second visit to the country. I only spent a few hours in Belgium. I spent the better part of a day going to Bastogne. I'm going to be spending a week in Belgium this time, so I'm excited about that. I know we've got some followers from Belgium on this channel. Would love to hear your thoughts in particular, but anyone, let's add to the conversation. Let's learn together. Use the comment section below. And check out some of the other videos that I mentioned that I'll put links for in the description. See you in a little while for the stream. Thanks for watching.